This is the second part of a presentation on the hero's inner journey. In the first part, I covered the departure and a portion of the quest, but here I'll examine the experience of the quest in more detail, as well as cover the sections of realization and return. In 1678, John Bunyan published The Pilgrim's Progress. It's a spiritual allegory of the journey of a pilgrim called Christian who travels from the city of destruction to the celestial city. The narrator tells us that he received the story in a dream. The hero, Christian, sets out on his inner journey with many trials and mistakes. The first is to slip into a bog called the Slough of Despond. The bog is a trap in which there arises in his soul many fears and doubts and discouraging apprehensions. The story gives us a good sense of the difficulties of the inner journey, the kinds of trials and struggles we have to contend with: despondency, complacency, unconsciousness, doubts that confront the ego with fears of death and dissolution. Along his journey, Christian also encounters helpers, some in earthly form, guides that he meets along the way, and others who are angelic. In our own inner journey, we can expect to experience struggle, but also unexpected support and guidance from our own inner self. So, first of all, let's review the hero's inner journey, the acts of the journey. Start with departure, then we go into the quest, then the realization and the return. I covered the departure in part one, and now I will focus on the details of the quest. The difficulties of the quest are different for everyone. They do not come in any particular order, and often they cycle and reoccur at different times. It all depends on the inner nature of the person who's journeying. So the trials and errors. Often the beginning of the inner journey is a bit rocky. We're filled with enthusiasm and overly optimistic about how easy the whole thing's going to be. We want it to be quick, we want it to be easy, because the ego tries to co-opt the whole journey for itself in order to feel better, to feel as though it's making progress. When I started my own spiritual practice at age 18, I firmly believed that I would be enlightened by the end of my 20s. Of course, that was totally unrealistic. We often get distracted and let our intentions wane, weaken, fall away. Until we establish a settled and dedicated routine of inner work, our attempts can be sporadic. We forget or we avoid or get distracted, and particularly when we find ourselves blocked or we don't feel as though we're making much progress. That's when the doubts set in. That's when the ego wants to feel as though it's accomplishing something or getting closer to some sort of goal. So this feeling of being blocked and bogged down can really undermine our intentions to continue. So it's easy to get bored and be tempted by different newer paths. You might be sitting in meditation and thinking to yourself, well, this isn't doing very much. This is boring. I wonder if there's another path that I could do. I wonder if there's another practice. So then we start looking for something more exciting, some practice that will be more entertaining for the ego, rather than sticking to a choice of practice which is in accord with our inner nature. Conflict. We often find ourselves at odds with ourselves, and sometimes we can feel isolated and alone with our unusual experiences and ideas. Friends and family do not really understand. We're changing, and they don't really always support the change or understand it or understand why this is so important to us. So the inner journey can be very lonely and isolating, even when we're in a community, because it's so impossible to describe our inner experiences to others, particularly those who don't share those kind of experiences. So self-doubt is a constant for many of us on the journey. Am I doing the right thing? Am I good enough? Am I making any progress? Of course, progress is itself a problematic idea in the inner world. The ego and the outer world can make progress. It can move forward. The inner world is somewhat timeless. It doesn't have that same sense of moving forward, of trying to accomplish some goal. Often we'll get anxious and depressed without any particular reason. What's happening is that the ego is being purified. We're trying to shift our sense of self from the ego to the self, and it gets threatened. And we experience these periods of intense confusion, disorientation, and we struggle to balance the demands of the world with our inner aspirations because there's always tension between outer demands and inner experiences. So it's hard to get our inner practices to fit with our outer routine, to fit into our schedule. And so we have to juggle these priorities. What's more important? Is it more important for me to sit quietly, or is it more important for me to be productive, to do something? The final part of the quest is often a big ordeal. We'll see this in all the major adventure stories. As you're getting closer to the end of the story, there's usually a big crisis. Now, some of us experience these spiritual crises as just a disturbance in our inner self. But for others, it can look like a psychological breakdown. I've known people who have had to go into psychiatric hospital because they are struggling with deepest fears and attachments in their life. These crises are often caused by pushing too hard, by wanting too much to make progress. The ego's desire for realization, before it's strong enough to contain the energies, the psychic and spiritual energies, can push it into a situation where it breaks down, where the ego is dissolved before it's ready. Jung had a crisis which was almost psychotic. You could say he was psychotic. He was visited by the spirits of the dead. And you can read about his experiences in the Red Book, because there's this inner struggle of ego, shadow, and self. And that struggle is not graceful or tidy. The central issue is almost always fear, the fear of the ego of dissolving and disappearing. Sometimes during the ordeal and crisis, the whole thing just feels hopeless, the whole quest, the whole business, and it's pointless to continue. There's a kind of loss of heart, of motivation and energy. These are symptoms of the ego letting go, but they can be very dispiriting. For many people, that's a sense in which they lose their faith. They lose their belief in themselves. The Desert Fathers in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th century called this acedia, a kind of giving in to lethargy, into complacency. They called it the noonday demon. In the Orthodox tradition, monastic tradition, they call it logistoi, the demon thoughts that pull at us and tell us that there is no point. Finally, there's the experience of spiritual dryness. There doesn't seem to be any connection to God, to the universe, to spirit, to even your inner self. Many mystics, including St. John of the Cross, had that experience. He called it the dark night of the soul. There's this sense in which there is no meaning, there is no purpose. Eckhart Tolle talks about the same kind of experience. Everything has been taken away from you, and it can lead to a kind of ego despair because the ego is dissolving. Then we have the process of realization. Now, of course, the realization, you cannot reach it using our mind or our will. It has to be a letting go, a surrender to an inner reality that's beyond who we think we are. In that sense, it's a death of the ego. And in order to embrace that death and find rebirth, we have to cease struggling. We have to surrender to the experience. We are shifting our sense of identity away from the ego, its fears and desires, to the greater self, something expansive yet formless. Our ego images, who we think we are, dissolve, become unimportant. As we surrender, the unexpected can happen. It's as though we've created this inner space and something can come into it. We feel a sense of something shifting, but we may not even know what that something is. We can't pin it down. It's an inner shift, a movement from the personal to the transpersonal. And then there's the experience of attainment. Now, attainment is always partial. and is often fleeting. We may know something has changed, but we may not know what that change really is. So it could come to us in the form of a big dream or some sort of numinous transpersonal experience. Or it may be more subtle, just a sense of expansion, of growth. Something tight is loosening inside of us. So there's something fundamental has changed. We know this, but we can't always pin it down. There may be images of light, of luminescence, of everything being connected. And certainly it comes with a aliveness, a quiet joyfulness, a feeling that the whole world is suffused with this living energy, what I would call the life force. The essence of realization is feeling connected to ourselves, to others, and to the world. We're participating in the universe. We're being part of something greater, something bigger than our small self. But realization comes with a challenge. The ego will try to colonize the experience. It'll try to co-opt it. It wants to inflate. It wants to become grandiose. And you can see this in the guru syndrome, when the guru begins to believe that they are the holder of all wisdom. So we try to hold on to grasp the experience, but it'll tend to slip away. It peaks, stays for a while, and then it dissipates. And we have to let it go. We cannot control it. We don't own it. The gifts are given to us. They are not ours. They don't belong to us. The more we cling to these gifts, the more those gifts tend to get polluted by the ego. And then we begin to know that every realization is only the beginning of a further journey. We're always at the beginning. In essence, there is never any achievement. There is no sense of progress in the inner world. Every moment is a call to begin the journey anew, afresh. We experience something, but its purpose may simply to keep us moving forward. A taste of how things can be in the future or even after our death. After realization comes the return. We have to journey back, and the return is often hard. The world can feel banal in comparison with the richness of numinous inner experiences. Often those who've had big experiences, say near-death experiences or transpersonal insights, have real difficulty adjusting to the ordinary world. My own near-death experience as an adolescent when I was 14 put me in a crisis for many years. I had this constant feeling that life was not meaningful. It had no importance, that I might as well be dead. There's always a tension between the two worlds because we have to stay connected with our inner experience, but we also have to be in the world, to live in the world of action and to live in the world of inner experience. Those two worlds have a different nature, a different quality. Integration takes time. We know that we're experiencing integration because we feel more content. We're not pulled around by our ego so much. And there's an inner joyfulness, a strong feeling that we need to do something to be of service to others. We want to make a difference. So what practices help us on the inner journey? Well, first of all, as we know, we have to find the best way for us as individuals to quiet our mind and open our heart. It takes time to connect to our inner self, so we have to put time aside to be still. We have to nurture our intention, strengthen that inner connection, that inner commitment to our individual path. We can't give in to complacency or laziness. We constantly need to ask for and listen to our inner guidance. Listen to a quiet prompting from inside of ourselves, and we have to follow those promptings, even if they are not exactly what we want. In some sense, if they aren't what we want, if they do not have that desire or fear attached to them, then we know that they do come from an inner place. It's not about what we want or don't want. It's more about what's right, what's fitting, what is in tune with our inner nature. We need to reflect and foster our self-awareness and self-acceptance. Question ourselves, question our beliefs, question our experiences. Take nothing for granted. And finally, we need to act. The true purpose of the inner journey is to make a positive difference in the world. What I mean by that is we make a difference by our being. We can be more loving. We can smile. We can sing. We can connect to people. We can say words of gratitude. We can help others. We can follow our inner purpose, our passions. But we are here to make a difference.